Hi there, I'm Mabel Chan, and this is One in a Billion. What if someone calls you crazy? So what? So nothing, right? If you're not. But not so if you're struggling with a mental disorder. The word crazy may feel like a weapon that's instantly stigmatizing and isolating.
Especially in Asian American cultures, there is a real problem with shame in terms of seeking mental health care.
That is journalist, writer, illustrator Hannah Bay. She's contributed a chapter to the book, Don't Call Me Crazy.
Hopefully by opening up about our own experiences, that'll encourage more young people to be able to feel comfortable seeking help and knowing where to go.
Hannah opened up the difficult chapter in her life, growing up with a mother with schizophrenia and her own battle to fight it. Here is our conversation. Welcome to One in a Billion, Hannah.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, Mabel.
This book is intended to provoke, right? The title is Don't Call Me Crazy. When you heard about this title, what comes to mind? How did you read it?
I thought it was a really smart title because, there's this expression that's, call me crazy, but ... And yes, and so I think that Kelly was really one of those extremely generous editors who made sure that every contributor got paid and got credit, and she really highlights the range of voices that are represented in this book. Kelly was very intelligently playing on that by including don't in parentheses. It's a little bit of a playful title. One of the questions that I was asked when I was on a panel for this book launch in Manhattan with Kelly and 3 of the other contributors was, how do we think of the word crazy? There are definitely other perspectives in this book. Heidi Heilig, who is a young adult author, she's also of an AAPI background. She wrote her entire essay about how she embraces the term crazy and how she comes to think of her own diagnosis and her own decision to not take medication and to, work through her own mental wellness challenges in her own way.
It depends on the industry or the field that you're in. Now, you and I are in media journalism. There's a lot of exaggeration, hyperbole, crazy is not even that bad a word. So it's almost like a fun, commonly used word that we even take pride in. It's like a badge of honor that if your idea is not crazy wild, that is probably not worth listening to, or the way you project yourself is not crazy wild, or some personality, right? And so for us, it doesn't have the same sting than for some people who are actually dealing with a problem. Am I right?
Yes, I think it's totally true. I think that it really depends on the individual and how they think about the word crazy. Growing up, when I or my sisters would bring up the word crazy to our mother, who did struggle with real mental health issues, she really reacted negatively toward that term. She would say, "Who are you calling crazy?" I kind of used it as a weapon at the time. I was an angry young teenager, and I'm really glad to be able to have grown since then.
Well, since you brought up your mother, can you read the first few lines in your chapter, Survival Mode?
Sure, yes. Survival mode. It had been dark for hours by the time I turned onto my street. I was coming home from one of my many after-school activities, maybe crew practice, or a Model United Nations conference, or a student government meeting. I can't remember now. My shoulders felt heavy as I thought of piles of homework waiting for me. As I pulled into the driveway, my headlights flashed across the front of the house and my heart lurched. It took a few seconds to register what I'd seen in the glare. A face, ghostly and wild-eyed, standing sentry just inside the front door. I had put the car in park when she burst out the door and ran onto the lawn, all flailing arms and rage. "I see you," she screamed in Korean, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. By now, they'd already written us off as that crazy Asian family. This wouldn't change their minds. "You whore! This is my house. Stay away from my husband." She was only inches from my face when Mom realized it was me.
Wow. So, Hannah, how old were you then?
I was 16 or 17 when all of this was happening.
Did you know what your mother was going through or struggling at the time?
No, I really didn't have an understanding of mental illness at the time, and she hadn't been diagnosed at that point. So I think I felt really confused and angry and hurt and unsafe at the time.
So how did you find out, and what did you do once you found out?
Well, it took many years, but at the time I was living in Korea. I was far away from my family who live in Northern Virginia, just outside DC. And I just heard, through online messages from my sister that my mother had gone missing. And when the police finally found her, she was hospitalized, and that was where she received her diagnosis. She was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia.
Wow, you were in high school spending some time in Korea?
No, so I wrote this essay, Survival Mode, that's in the book, and that takes place in high school. After college, I moved to South Korea in 2007 on a journalism fellowship, and I stayed there from 2007 to 2013 working as a journalist. I would say between 2010 and 2012 is when she was finally diagnosed. So it really took many, many years.
Why did it take so many years?
I think because there is this real resistance among people who are struggling with mental health issues, especially in the Asian American community, to seek help. Actually, last year, there was a really excellent blog post published by the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It was called Why Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders Don't Go to Therapy. And one of the statistics that it points out is that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are the least likely to reach out for help when they are struggling with mental illness.
Why do you think that is?
So this blog post by NAMI really points to a lot of different answers. They talk about the pressure to be successful and not show signs of weakness in AAPI cultures. It's, part of this pernicious model minority myth that we have to assume that, AAPIs are wealthy and highly educated. Often, Asian Americans place so much emphasis on family, and one of the headers in this blog post is that it's a burden to share my emotions. There's this feeling that, family issues should be kept within the family and that to seek outside help is inappropriate.
But let me just ask you this question about your own family, right? So your mother had been showing symptoms of abnormality, let's just put it that way, for a couple of years, and it was not lost on you. Was it lost on your father? Was it lost on your sister?
I think that every member of my family felt that something was wrong. And whenever, as far as I understand it, whenever one of them would bring it up, my mother would get defensive and refuse to accept that there was a problem. And from what I've heard anecdotally from other Asian Americans, this seems like a very common response, especially for those who are struggling with schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. Unfortunately, in the United States, you cannot compel somebody to seek mental health care or to be institutionalized unless they present a threat to themselves or to others. So it really creates this situation where only when mental illness has reached an extreme point can people be forced into care. And there's a good reason for that because, decades and centuries ago, mental health care was non-existent. It was locking people up in asylums against their will.
It can get violent.
And of course, there's the problem of access to care. I touched on this earlier, but it's very hard to find professionals who have the cultural expertise and language ability. My parents don't speak English as their first language, so I think it would be very difficult for them to express themselves in a way that they felt most comfortable in English to be able to share the thoughts and feelings that they were experiencing. Mental health care is also incredibly expensive in the United States. A lot of it is not covered by insurance, which is it's really unthinkable to me, the way that, mental health care can have a profound impact on somebody's physical health, yet it's this neglected form of care in terms of the way that it's covered by health insurance or not covered.
Right. So would you say it had been maybe 5, 10, 15 years before your family finally saw there's a danger that your mother's behavior was showing to herself or to others before they got help?
Yes, I would say that based on my research on schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder, these symptoms really start to present themselves around puberty. So my mother must have been showing these signs early on, and they must have gotten progressively worse and worse as she went untreated. And I think for me, being able to find out this kind of information, thanks to my therapist, thanks to working with a mental health professional on my own who understands, different disorders and also knows how to teach me about them.
Well, teach me. What are some of these symptoms that, you could flag? Some of us who are actually quite, uninformed, let alone ignorant of what's around us.
That first scene in my essay, I talk about my mother mistaking me for basically imaginary other woman that she had a delusion of, that my father was having an affair. So this is a hallucination, and that is certainly a real symptom of schizophrenia. So hallucinations are a symptom of schizophrenia. Another is disorganized speech. I point to this in my most recently published essay, The Cost of a Mother, in Pigeon Pages, where my mother was increasingly placing erratic phone calls to my places of work when I was in Korea. And at the time, I was new to Korea. I was just starting to learn the Korean language, which I had resisted for most of my childhood growing up in the United States. And over the course of the essay, which spans several years of me living in Korea, I become more and more familiar with the Korean language. And that's when I realized that I can't understand my mom on the phone, not because I can't understand Korean. It's because her speech is disorganized. It's garbled and not making sense because of her mental illness.
That must have exacerbated your relationship with her.
Absolutely. And, part of my growth has been to take a lot of that anger and pain that I felt at the time and to turn it into empathy. And also with my own coping mechanisms. I've had to put up boundaries. I have actually become estranged from my parents. I am not in communication with them, and part of that is a defense mechanism to be able to protect myself.
That was my next question about how did you cope, right? And you talked about that in your chapter about building a hard shell. One way to cope was high school. Tell me about that high school you went to and you picked. How did you do?
Looking back, I'm 33 years old now, and I've been out of high school for quite a long time. I graduated in the spring of 2003. And at the time, I really felt like I had been a pretty poor student. But now that I have some perspective, I graduated with a B+ average from this magnet school that was highly selective and competitive.
Why put yourself through that? Wouldn't you want to give yourself a little break as an escape?
I knew that with the intense pressure, it also came with some of the most dedicated, truly exceptional educators. I'm still in touch with some of my teachers from that time. My favorite English teacher, who really gave me this gift of loving the written word, he and I still email back and forth about the work that I'm doing. I have friends from high school who have been my constant throughout my life, who have been my friends for more than 10 years, who have been an endless source of support. And not all of them knew exactly what was going on at the time, but having that kind of love and friendship gave me a real foundation of being able to feel safe and being able to see that I could aim for something higher.
Basically, you aimed for the best that you could possibly achieve, and you were aspiring to be a part of that, which could radically transform you from something so traumatic and tragic.
Right. And I think that As a teenager, I didn't have the language to even be able to articulate what was going on.
You pretty much try to insulate yourself, right, from your family so that you could focus. How did you build that support system to help you make decisions, for example, with college and major and all that stuff that normally parents might get involved in?
I think that I was basically on my own, and I wanted to go somewhere in a warm climate.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, I knew I wanted to do some kind of job that required writing.
Did you think that writing was also an escape? Did you turn to writing to express what's going on, what you saw and what you were trying to hide or afraid to show?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Mabel. Certainly, writing is a way of me making sense of my past. Throughout high school and college, I knew I loved to write, but I didn't really know what I was trying to say. Also, I felt this intense pressure to assimilate into mainstream American culture. So as a Korean American, I really tried to hide aspects of my identity and anything that made me stand out, which included my family's struggles with mental illness. I definitely was trying to eventually express what I was feeling, but it came out in different ways.
You were self-censoring in a way.
Definitely. I was definitely self-censoring, but my love of reading showed me this bigger world that was out there. And I was really lucky to get to read some unusual books thanks to the recommendations of teachers who, could see that the students that I was learning alongside, we were unusual and we had wide-ranging tastes. So in addition to reading the traditional books like To Kill a Mockingbird, The Scarlet Letter, we also were reading things like Evelyn Waugh and Joseph Heller's Catch-22. And one book that I really loved throughout high school was The Tao of Pooh, which is it's a book that kind of draws upon the characters of Winnie the Pooh and applies their personalities to the beliefs of Taoism.
So would you say that reading leads you to writing and they go together to give you this world of tools, language, and imagination to unleash what you've been bottling up?
Definitely. Throughout college, I was learning more about the craft of journalism, to use my words to tell other people's stories. And I think it gave me a way of practicing writing without having to be too vulnerable myself.
Right. So you felt that you were able to serve the public by telling other people's stories while you didn't have to quite deal with your own. But was it possible to interact with yourself while you were living in other people's stories and help yourself get over or understand some problems? Was it that kind of interactive soul searching?
I think that it took me a long time to be able to bring myself into it. I would say that I'm only really starting to do that now, with the publication of Don't Call Me Crazy. And now as a fellow with the Asian American Writers Workshop, I'm an Open City Fellow, so I'm focusing on narrative nonfiction, telling the stories of Asian Americans in New York City. And this is really the first opportunity that I have to dive deep and to have the creative freedom to be able to bring myself into the journalism that I want to practice.
Since you mentioned Open City, so congratulations on being a fellow. I'm actually going to quote what you wrote there. You said, "It hurts now to dredge up my past. For 20 years, I tried to cover it up, to lose the memories, to disassociate from the abused child that I had once become. I refused to consider her a legitimate part of my identity. That is not me," I told myself, ashamed of my trauma. I wanted desperately to believe that lie. How would you describe those years when you tried to cover up?
I think I describe it somewhat in the essay Survival Mode in the book. I really focused on achievement. Now, in hindsight, I can say that it felt a little mindless, that I was just following the definition of success that society and my competitive school environment were telling me was the way forward. But I think that with some distance and maturity and personal growth, I've been able to question my previous definition of success and to start being more empathetic and to start letting myself feel more and to do the work in therapy, in seeking psychiatric care, to be able to understand myself better and to be able to share that with others as well.
That is definitely a huge change. I was going to ask you if you could sort of identify or summarize, characterize the difference between then during the cover-up years and now. How would you describe the new you?
I would say that I am much more service-oriented. I think that journalism is definitely a career where you are meant to serve the public, but in my work at CNN, for example, that was my last full-time job before I started entering into this new phase of narrative writing. You know, I was writing for an audience that was interested in business and financial news, but I don't think that these are matters of the soul the way that sharing my own personal journey with mental health, with reaching out to the neighboring communities of Asian Americans that I live among here in New York City, that I feel like I'm able to reach now, doing work through the Asian American Writers Workshop, and also now having more flexibility to volunteer for causes like the Asian American Journalists Association, and also with volunteering for the nonprofit Womankind. When I was in a really high-pressure news environment, I didn't have the time and energy to be able to do this kind of community service. And I feel really grateful to be privileged enough to be able to give my time and to be able to think in a more service-oriented way as a writer.
When was that turning point when you decided to come out of the shell and sought help for yourself?
2016. This is a credit to my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time. He is an incredible, sensitive human being. He was raised by two parents who were social workers and therapists, and so mental health is a huge part of his family's life. My husband, Adam, was the one who encouraged me to seek out care for myself, because as we were getting more serious as a couple and starting to think about becoming a family by getting married, he wanted me to think about how I would continue to define family throughout my life and our future together. And so he was the one who really encouraged me to seek out therapy. And I'm so grateful that he did, because it really made me start to question whether the work that I was doing as a journalist was meaningful to me, whether it was what I was most passionate about. It made me examine my innermost self and to start to dig into these buried traumas that I had tried to just gloss over for my entire adult life at that point. I recently read this incredible book called Racial Melancholia, Racial Dissociation, written by the cultural critic David Eng and the psychotherapist Shin-Hee Han. And it is about Asian Americans and our approach to mental health. And dissociation, this separating of yourself, is a really key concept. By shutting down, I was trying to dissociate from my own feelings, my own fear and anger. It's a coping mechanism.
Right.
I don't think it was the healthiest way for me to be. And it's not to say that I have it all figured out now.
I understand.
I still shut down sometimes when I don't want to argue in the way that I know.
Hey, me too.
I've been able to acknowledge that this is a process. I don't have to be a perfect human being. I'm a work in progress.
Now, am I right that you mentioned your father was a pastor?
That's correct.
And how did he convey faith in the middle of all this to you?
Well, faith was a huge part of our lives. We went to church every Sunday. He was the head of our congregation, and I very much internalized faith as part of that achievement mentality. You know, I think there's this Protestant work ethic that has come through in American culture in so many ways, and I really did feel that drive to be better in every sense of the word, to continue to improve myself. And as I've gotten older, I really have separated from organized religion. I feel like It is full of contradictions, and at its core, Christianity is about, in my opinion, it's about helping people and having compassion for those who are different than us.
During the difficult years when your mother was exhibiting all these symptoms that were worsening, from domestic violence to child abuse, faith was not a source of strength for you?
I mean, I think when I was a child, it was a source of strength because I believed that if you endure enough suffering, that you'll be going to a better place one day, you know? But what I saw was that my family, my parents, as the heads of a Christian congregation, they were supposed to be a source of counsel and comfort to the people who attended our church. But in being these figureheads for a community, they weren't able to seek out help themselves, because I think that there is this focus on status and top-down leadership in this kind of expression of religion that I think did not serve my family in the way that it could have. I felt like there was no one for my parents to reach out to.
Well, thanks for being so clear about the complexity of the problem. On one hand is with your mother. On the other hand is the role that religion or faith plays in your case, with your father being the pastor and with you as a little child being confused by the behavior that you saw, right, from both. And you were seeking peace and solace that weren't there.
Right. And Mabel, I think it's a credit to your questions, because it has really made me think about the way that I conceived of religion at the time and how it has changed.
How has it changed now for you?
I think that time has given me a lot of distance from religion, and it has shown me that I can do good in my community in a secular context. Since 2016 is that I've really been able to connect more with younger people through mentoring, volunteering, and with getting to know younger people, it has given me a lot of optimism about the world.
Do you see yourself in them?
Of course. I try to approach them with more empathy. It's really important to show younger journalists kindness and to show them the way forward. Actually, this industry is so tough. They're dealing with enough character building in their day-to-day as journalists. And so when they are coming to somebody for mentoring or for career guidance, the best thing that I can do is to show compassion and empathy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hannah. In our next episode,
I doubt myself a lot. Yeah, of course. When I don't book the big roles that I want, or even the small roles, and I'm like, wait, how come I didn't even get that?
That is Danya Yuan, a Harvard graduate with big dreams in Hollywood. How did she deal with rejection, self-doubt, and later got offers from NBC, Disney, HBO, BuzzFeed, and Instagram TV? That is our next episode, This Asian American Life, Cutting My Own Path in Hollywood, in 2 weeks, December 17. One in a Billion is
Brian Latwinowicz,
Yvette Yu, Maggie She.
And our lovely theme song is composed by Brad McCarthy. Let us know if you want to join our team of volunteers, help us plan events, pitch a story. Just go to our website, oneinaBillionVoices.org. Don't forget to rate us on Apple iTunes. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Support for our podcast comes from our collaboration with the Victor and William Fung Foundation.